So this is going to be a little bit of a different video. This isn't going to be just a straight up album review of a classic album. This is going to be more of my own experience with this album, how I came to love it, what it really means to me, and do a little bit of reflection of it rather than a review. So this is a new series that I'm starting. I'm hoping that it really takes off, and well, without further ado, let's dive into it.
At a higher altitude, flag unfurled.
The Division Bell by Pink Floyd. So The Division Bell is kind of the second last album from Pink Floyd. It's kind of hard to tell. In terms of like context for this album, this was the one where Rick White joined back up with the band after a momentary lapse of reason, where he was just the kind of studio musician. So Rick's essence is definitely found on this album, where it wasn't found with the momentary lapse of reason. A momentary lapse of reason is definitely Nick Mason and David Gilmour's work. I mean, it's more of a David Gilmour work than anything else. And I mean, I don't really want to get into the whole legality thing where Roger Waters is like, you can't call yourself Pink Floyd if you're only two people. He has a little bit of a point. Actually, has a pretty big point. But still, let's just focus in on the Division Bell. So this is the three of them. This is very much Nick, Rick, and David playing it all out. And this was released, back in 1993, 1994? So the mid-90s, where, like, progressive rock was done. Like, unless you were trying to revitalize progressive rock, most of the proggers from the past weren't really putting out albums all that much, even though Genesis a couple years ago from that put out We Can't Dance, and Yes had just put out Union and was going to put out Talk and Open Your Eyes. But even then, it was just kind of like lackluster, like it was more of a whimper than a bang in that sense. But here comes Pink Floyd with the Division Bell, and kind of showcases that even though they're no longer doing prog, they are still putting out brilliant soundscapes. The one thing that really ushers this album and really is the through line is Rick's playing. His keyboard work on this is just stellar. I love the tones and the feelings that he's putting on here. Even though, David Gilmour is kind of the rising star on this one, well, not so much rising anymore, but, his guitar work is the soul. It's the thing that's really front and center. I really do feel like Rick's keyboards are the foundation. It's the essence. It's what's keeping everything together. And I really enjoy and love that aspect of this. Coming into this album, I was presented with this album, like I almost grew up with this album, like my dad had the CD and I remember him playing it a few times. It was never really his favorite, so it kind of stayed on the shelf more often than not. And I would pick it up from time to time and listen to it as I was growing up. And, I loved it. You love the big ones, like What Do You Want From Me, which is very much like a Have a Cigar, or, those really big tracks from the yesteryears of Pink Floyd. I also love High Hopes, which a lot of people call the Division Bell. The closing track on this, I love how emotional it is. I love how big and verbose it is. But I also love some of those smaller ones, like Cluster 1 and Marooned. Marooned is probably my favorite track off of this album because of how just emotional it is. But I also love some of the more peppy, poppy stuff. Like it's more of like a contemporary, like an adult contemporary band with Great Day for Freedom, Take It Back, and Coming Back to Life. The time in my life where I was really getting into this was more in my like middle school, high school transitional period. And at this point, I was suffering pretty heavily with anxiety. So spoiler alert, this is going to be a little bit of a deep dive into my personal life when I was of a particular age. And I remember kind of in late middle school, we're looking at like the beginnings of high school of grade 9 and 10, my family was obsessed with once a year going to a beach vacation destination. We're looking at like Bahamas, we're looking at Turks and Caicos, the Dominican Republic, those beach resort locations. I always felt a little uncomfortable going to these places because the moment we stepped off of the resort, it was a completely different world. Like, it was a contrast of extremes. You know, you had extreme gluttony, extreme wealth on the one side of the island, and then extreme poverty, extreme suffering on the other. And really, all that it was a street that was dividing these two. And it also made me very uncomfortable. I mean, you know, showing my whole, you know, white privilege aspect of that, I didn't know how to consolidate that, because I wasn't old enough to really reason or rationale anything about that. I mean, there really isn't, but at least, you know, there's a little bit of like a rationale that you can have on that, or at least kind of distance yourself above that. But on top of that, throw on, you know, mid-puberty anxiety, and I was chock full of it, where most people in puberty, you know, you grow, your voice changes and all that. That never really happened for me. It was a very, very, very gradual thing. You know, my voice very gradually decreased in tone, and I very gradually grew. There was never a growth spurt. There was one thing that definitely came up in a peak, and that was the anxiety. And it really blossomed when I was on these trips. And one of the things that really helped me get through some of the more dicey and scary, you know, anxiety attacks, full-on panic attacks, was music. It was one of the things that grounded me. It was one of the things that saved me. And on that trip, I had a Sony Discman that also was able to play MP3 discs. And so before we left, I put on like Jethro Tull's Thick as a Brick. I put half of Pink Floyd's discography on. I made this MP3 disc that had like 16 to 24 hours worth of music to help me calm down. And one of the major albums that I threw on last minute, almost as a secondary thought, was Pink Floyd's The Division Bell, because I remember listening to it as, you know, a number of years prior to that and being like, oh yeah, this album's pretty chill. This album's pretty atmospheric. I think I'll put this one on because it's a little bit more chill than my other tracks that I was putting on there, because I had another disc that was full of like Limp Bizkit and, you know, a lot of those nu metal, like System of a Down. So I'm like, okay, so I've got my angsty music. Let's put on some chill music for like more of the prog stuff. And I remember listening to this album on repeat while I was suffering through some of my really big panic attacks of the time. And I remember getting grounded with Pulls Apart and really getting into that and feeling like I was being pulled apart within my own mind, you know, my mind betraying me, and just getting everything at like an 11 for my fight or flight, and being brought back to earth quite literally with tracks like Coming Back to Life. And Keep Talking was a really good item for me because it allowed me to open up and talk about this with my parents, which eventually led me to get help, which was, I guess that's my big thesis for this. If you're suffering from all that, please reach out and get help. Just being really brought back to life while listening to this. And whenever I listen to this, I'm brought back to that sense of relief as I was listening to this album in this very turbulent time of my life where things were chaotic. I didn't have this needed structure, and this really provided that for me. I remember very vividly sitting on the beach, freaking out and having a full-on panic attack, and just listening to Marooned over and over and over and over again until I could finally breathe, and then going right into A Great Day for Freedom, which it really was. You know, it brought me out of that loop and I was finally free of it. So I love that it was just coming right into A Great Day for Freedom. Yeah, this album really did help me through an extremely difficult time of my life. And whenever I start to feel myself slipping back into that, I immediately go running back to this album and get swept away from Rick White's playing styles on that keyboard. It allows me to drift back and just find and ground myself back to allow myself to breathe again. So yeah, this album really, really does mean a lot to me. I feel it's wrong to give this a rating with the history that I have with it, so I won't give it a rating outside of, if you haven't listened to it by this point, please, I highly, highly recommend that you do. It's one of my all-time favorite albums and one that I come back to yearly, especially within the past 2 years, because if you haven't noticed, it's kind of crazy out there. So yeah, this is an absolute delight of an album for me. And it never fails to bring me back down to earth. And it's a great day for freedom. It allows me to keep talking, even when I'm lost for words. And now I'm just looking through the track list and trying to figure out other things that I can say about this. But I think I'm going to leave it there. That's what I've got for the Division Bells. What did you guys think? Do you love this album? Do you hate this album? Let me know of your own thought by commenting down below. And also let me know of an album with the story of an album that saved you or that helped you out. Please let me know about that by commenting down below. Part of this whole thing is to talk a little bit more about the history that I've had with my mental health, as well as the albums that have saved me and brought me through those. I did that a little bit with my Lateralis review, so if you haven't already listened to my Lateralis review, go ahead and listen to that one, because I dive a little bit deeper into that style of my life, that side of my life, and this one is kind of a continuation of that conversation that I hope to keep having with other albums down the road. But this was a great one to start it all off with. So, if you like what you see and you want to help support me, consider donating to my Patreon. I've left the link down below. Even $1 a month does really go a long way. You get your name at the end credits as a thank you, and each tier gets their own reward as a thank you from me. And if you want to see more of me, if you want to get more of this, I've got my podcast of Quid Prog Quo, wherever you listen to your podcasts, as well as my own separate channel for that to watch. And I've got my other separate channel of my notes on tabletop role-playing games. And I think that's about it. So thank you all so much for watching. As always, you guys are definitely the best. And until next time, notes out.